Hello and welcome to episode 326 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Hello, Ian. I assume you're still there and have not melted.
I have not melted. I melted a little bit earlier this week, but I have reconstituted the puddle that was formerly me, and I'm back in action.
That's good.
So we sent the heat
hot.
your way.
Yes, Thank you. Please stop doing that. We don't want any more, but it's hot here. I know it's been hot in Europe. It's hot all over.
It's just hot.
Welcome
just
to
hot.
summer. You know,
Exactly.
as soon as we entered summer solstice, it became hot. So right on cue. Can't be mad.
Right on cue. Yeah. So last week was busy for all the wrong reasons. And this week is thankfully a little less busy. We don't have a major crash to talk about, thankfully. We will have some updates later in the program on Air India Flight 171.
Kind
and
of.
some things to say about the updates or lack thereof. But we do have plenty of updates.
Quiet weeks are good weeks, you know?
Yeah.
I'll take it.
I'm not sure if I call this quiet.
I don't know if it was a good week, but quiet aviation news-wise, there was some headlining stuff. But I went to Boston and back in one day, and it was fine, and nothing happened. Everything was early. So therefore, everything else in the world must have also been fine.
That's quite the extrapolation. I appreciate that from you.
Yes, I'll take it.
So let's basically pick up where we left off last week, where we kind of explained the massive influx of tanker and transport aircraft from the United States into bases in Europe and the Middle East. We left off saying, hopefully, this is just some posturing. And it turned out that that wasn't, in fact, the case. The U.S., on the 21st of June, conducted an attack on 3 Iranian nuclear facilities using a contingent of B-2 bombers, fighter escorts, and, quote, dozens of tanker aircraft. Those aircraft, the B-2s that is, departed Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, flew east and dropped the massive ordnance penetrator, the 30,000-pound world's largest bomb, on 3 nuclear sites and returned after about 36 hours total flight time. But that's not what we thought was going to happen, is it, Jason?
No.
Because the U.S. Air Force conducted one of the most expensive, hey, look over there routines ever.
Yeah, we can't afford healthcare, but we can afford to fly B-2 bombers from Missouri to Iran and back as made you look.
Well, to be fair, the diversion didn't go all the way to Iran. They stopped off in Hawaii, so that was fun.
Oh, that's nice.
So here's what happened. They, at 3:13 UTC on June 21st, so that's the evening before at about 10:13 local time, in Oklahoma, a bunch of KC-135s took to the air. And almost immediately, they jumped to the Flight Radar 24 and Most Tracked Flights list. Then, because they were flying east, and everyone was kind of like, well, maybe something's going to happen. They were flying east through southern Missouri, and then they turned north and basically flew to Whiteman Air Force Base in a single row. And then, as soon as they turned west from Whiteman Air Force Base, they fanned out, as if they were, I don't know, maybe conducting aerial refueling operations with aircraft that are based at Whiteman Air Force Base. The aircraft based at Whiteman Air Force Base happened to be the B-2 Spirits. So everyone's following these tankers. They're at the top of the Most Tracked Flights list. People that are listening to ATC are hearing call signs and things like that going, okay, we know what these tankers are doing. They gas everybody up and go back to Oklahoma. Then there's a second flight of tankers that appear off the coast of California that are also refueling. And it turns out that was all a diversion because the aircraft actually conducting the operation on the nuclear facilities in Iran were flying east. All of the tankers involved in that were not broadcasting Mode S or ADS-B until they were on the way back. So on the way back, the flight of B-2s was gassed up over the Mediterranean Sea. At least that's when we started to see things on ADS-B. So there was a bunch of KC-135s over the Mediterranean west of Shania. And then there was another group about 6 hours later of 10 KC-135s and KC-46s near the Azores. And then, of course, the announcement came of what had happened. So that was the 21st of June. 2 days later, Iran launched their counterattack, attacking U.S. bases in Qatar. So one of the U.S.'s largest air bases in the Middle East is based in Qatar, Al Udeid Air Base. It's also the home of multiple forces and the U.S. command. Missiles were launched from Iran at the U.S. base. Their airspace in Qatar, the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, and portions of Saudi Arabia that kind of form a horseshoe around Dammam, where along the coast, that all closed, and everybody had to scramble and figure out where to go. I will say that the Bahrain controllers did an incredible job getting aircraft out of the airspace.
Yeah, having to divert the entire, basically, operational fleet of Qatar Airways, Etihad, and Emirates, and all the others in the region is just kind of, I'm not going to say unprecedented, because there's precedent for it in the past, but having to do that without much of any warning. You need a couple cups of coffee, a couple pots of coffee that day, probably.
Yeah.
And then to deal with all of the recovery flights, bringing all those aircraft back home. So not just the diversions, but figuring out how to get all those aircraft back on top of the flights that were already en route that weren't diverted, but were still on the way. Like, that's no small feat whatsoever. But correct me if I'm wrong, Ian, but I believe the airspace was closed before the Iranian airstrike happened. Do I have that timeline right?
Kinda, sorta. It sounds like what happened is Iran called the, hey, we're going to launch some missiles at you hotline, and said, we're going to launch some missiles at you. And they said, okay, we'd rather you didn't, but if you have to, thanks for letting us know.
Thanks for the heads up. I mean, that's nice. That's not nothing. We can't discount that, because there would have been a lot of airplanes in the path between Iran and
it was still a real-time scramble.
It was still a, hey, figure this out. You've got a few minutes, but some warning is better than no warning, of course.
Yeah,
because there would have been a lot of aircraft in the way.
Yeah, exactly. There was a fly-a-deal flight that was kind of left hanging. I'm not sure what their deal was, but they circled basically in the middle of the Gulf, near the far eastern edge of Bahrain's FIR, and just tried to figure out what to do before finally heading back west. I'm not sure what took them so long, but I think there were something like 200,000 people at some point tracking that flight. It was Flight Radar 24's busiest day ever. So that's
something.
I think it says something about the interest in what's happening. So let's talk about some diversions. So,
this is where it gets devastating.
Yeah, into Doha. So this is just flights that were bound for Doha. We'll talk about other flights in just a minute, but this is just flights that were bound for Doha. 102 versions overall.
Ooh.
I'll do it by country, and then we can break down some of the airport-specific diversions. So this is, 18 to Turkey, 15 to India, 13 to Oman. A bunch went back to the UK and other Western European, origins, not destinations. Specifically, Muscat took in 11 aircraft, Istanbul took in 10, Jeddah took in 9, Medina 6, Daman 6, Bangalore 5, Abu Dhabi 4, Hyderabad 4, and Bahrain 3. Then there were a few rather interesting diversions overall that weren't necessarily bound for Doha, but were affected by the airspace closure and the congestion created by the closure of those airspaces. The most impacted one, would be Qantas's QF-33, which was on its way from Perth to Paris and went back to Perth, landing after about 15 hours in the air.
That's just awful. Yeah. Ouch. And then they'd have to do it all over again. So it's not just like 15 hours of pain, but no, there's a whole lot more coming soon. That's oof.
Yeah. QF9 from Perth to London also diverted, but they were a bit further along in their journey. So they diverted to Singapore This was on the 23rd. They left Singapore today on the 25th of June, finally making it to London 2 days later. So a rough trip there as well. But knowing Qantas, I'm sure the passengers were well taken care of, or at least I hope they were.
And I think we talked about this before. We had mentioned that some of the U.S. airlines had travel waivers, or maybe we just talked about this in our text thread, but travel waivers or suspensions to...
I think we touched on it
I think we talked about it, but United is currently planning on resuming flights to Dubai July 3rd and Tel Aviv on August 1st. So I'm pretty surprised about the Dubai suspension all the way until July 3rd. That seems quite conservative. I'm actually a little surprised why they have suspended.
I think July 3rd is kind of the standard date that a lot of airlines are using.
Yeah.
It seems to me that that's just kind of what was chosen.
Yeah. Also, American service, I think from Philly to Doha. Not sure what the deal is with that one at all. But yeah, there are still definitely some impacts here for the U.S. airlines to the Middle East where they don't have a huge presence, and now there's really none again. Maybe it comes back. I hope it does, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, one assumes they'll bring it back as soon as they feel comfortable doing so. There was also a couple of interesting diversions, not diversions to alternate airfields, but just reroutes in progress. The most interesting one to me was the Turkmenistan Airlines from Medina to Ashgabat, where they got all the way into the UAE or near the UAE and then had to fly back west and then south and east and all the way around. Having already lost access to Iranian airspace, what had been, I think, 5 and something hour long flight ended up being closer to 8 when it was all said and done. So just a rough bit of flying for them. But again, I mean, just an incredible job by the air traffic controllers clearing that airspace and helping aircraft figure out where they needed to go. And all manner of aircraft, because, I mean, one of the aircraft that diverted was a fully laden A380 out of Abu Dhabi, one of the A380s. And then you're trying to slot in Fly Dubai 737s and all sorts of things. And just the controllers doing a ton of work to figure out where they could send aircraft and what was still open. So really impressive. Okay, what's happening now? Jason touched on the American or US-based carrier flights, but we've got some European news as well. Generally speaking, Tel Aviv is reopening. They are in the process, European airlines are in the process of announcing when they'll be restarting flights. Nothing definitive across the board yet, but we'll see where that goes. Iraqi airspace has reopened, and there are a number of carriers that have resumed using Iraqi airspace, including Turkish Airlines, Fly Dubai, Air Arabia, Kuwait Airways, and both Syrian carriers, so Syrian Air and Sham Wings. We've also got Iranian airspace kind of open. So there's a line that Iranian authorities have drawn that kind of cuts Iran into thirds, I guess is a good way to put it. And so the western 2/3 of Iranian airspace is still closed to traffic, except international flights that are bound for Tehran and, quote, special domestic flights. I'm not sure what those would entail.
But you know you're not on one.
Yeah, there you go. But the easternmost third, so basically the area of Iran that is east of Dubai, that airspace is open and is starting to be used again. Fly Dubai being the first foreign carrier to use Iranian airspace on their way to Bishkek and Moscow. So that has happened in the hour before we recorded. So I'm sure there will be more updates. Emirates and Qatar are still going around both Iran and Iraq for the moment. They have both said that they will make a determination based on all available evidence and how safe they feel sending their aircraft into those airspaces, but they have not said when they might restart operations there. So that's where we are now after the U.S. attack on Iranian nuclear facilities, the Iranian response on U.S. bases in Qatar, and a ceasefire that seems to be holding between Israel and Iran. So hopefully next week we can come back and say everything's open again.
Sure. Gonna be a long week.
They all are these days.
Yeah. That's the truest thing you've ever said.
Let's switch gears and get even angrier about things.
Oh.
Because this one I'm a little boggled by. The crash of Air India Flight 171 happened about 2 weeks ago now. And we know nothing. And that's not to say that we know nothing, because that would still be fine. If we, you and I, Jason, and our listeners, who I assume no one listening to the podcast is a Indian air accident investigator, although if they are, this little rant is for you. They still haven't listened to the black boxes.
Or if they have,
they haven't said anything about it.
Aren't saying anything.
So as of yesterday, so the 24th of June, ANI in India is reporting the Civil Aviation Minister of India as saying that the combined cockpit voice and flight data recorder are still in India. And they are still deciding on where to review that data.
Did they happen to mention why they are still reviewing where to send it to?
The ministry said, quote, after due assessment of all technical, safety, and security considerations. I have no idea what that means.
Is that it? I thought there was going to be more to that sentence.
Nope,
it doesn't make much sense. You either do it in India, you send it to Washington, to the NTSB to do it, or that's really it. What are your other options here?
There are no shortage of labs that could do it.
Yeah, it's a Boeing aircraft, so obviously the U.S. has an interest here in doing it. So you could send it to the NTSB. They're more than capable. You could send it to France. You could send it to the UK. Send it lots of places. But if they are actually just simply sitting on it while they figure out where to send it, that's extremely not okay, for lack of better terms.
Or having said that they remain committed to full transparency in the inquiry, they could say, we're still deciding where to send it because.
Yes, it should not take this long to decide where to send it at all, because if there is actually the off chance that there is something endemic to the 787 or to the engines, we need to know about that. And spending a week simply deciding where to send the thing to read it is not okay, because usually by this point we have at least some indication potentially of what happened, or there have been, if this was in the US, the NTSB would have been holding a press conference at least once a day at this point, to the point where there is no more relevant information to disseminate. That has just been commonplace. And what's happening in this vacuum of really any actual information coming out is nonsense coming out. And I think
literal nonsense.
John Ostrauer's The Air Current put out a piece today, I believe, about this situation where basically AI slop, as it's known, is filling the void of information in the crash investigation. And people are, I don't want to say falling for it, but they're falling for it. People are generating entire fictitious reports that look very real, but are obviously not, because India apparently hasn't done anything to this point that at least publicly acknowledged anything. So this is not good. This is not how silence is pretty much the worst thing you could do in the modern information hungry society. You just can't do this. And I don't understand it.
I don't either. The first, I don't know how, I guess the EFR, the Enhanced Airborne Flight Recorder. So it's the combined cockpit voice and flight data recorder. The first one was found on the 13th of June. The other one was found on the 16th of June. So we are 9 days after the second one was found, and they still have not cracked them open to see what's inside.
Or if they have, they are,
they've done this.
Not great. I expect better out of a country like India. This has real Chinese vibes where maybe something's happening, maybe it's not, but they're not really going to tell us. You expect that out of a country like China. I don't expect that out of a country like India, especially as they're trying to reshape Air India into this true global competitor. They're not doing the new privatized Air India any favors by potentially withholding or just sitting on information at this point. It's bad for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt.
They're making it real hard, though.
They are. But this particular instance is they're figuring out what to do and they want to get it right. I want to give them the benefit of the doubt, but they need to speak up.
Yes.
And do something.
Yep. You know who should have less benefit of the doubt? I think it's us.
Why is it us, Jason?
I think we have a few things to correct.
We do need to atone for our errors. We gleefully atone for our errors. We regret the errors, but we are happy to clear them up. One, the 787-8 does not have automatically opening doors, gear doors. So the 787-9 and -10 do. And this information comes to us from a North American 787 captain. So a little bit of background on why the doors open. I'm going to do my best to kind of summarize this because it's a long and technical explanation, but it is super interesting. So the flight director on the HUD that guides the optimal rotation rate for the pilot flying to follow is called the TOGA reference line. And it's designed to help the pilots maintain the right attitude in case of an engine failure. So if you pull back too much, you bleed off too much speed. If you don't pull back soon enough, you could run out of runway before you're in the air. And so it guides the most efficient rotation possible. When the gear doors open, that creates a significant amount of drag, and it actually dips the reference line a bit so that the aircraft can climb out as efficient as possible. On the -9 and -10, they removed the manual input of basically opening those doors when the lever is selected. So it opens them a second after the landing gear senses the weight off, so that the drag characteristics doesn't change significantly and that the handling characteristics are smoother. So it's not on the -8. That is a Boeing thing, which I assume at this point was because the -8 came first and they went later on and said, oh, we could do this.
Well, I think we've talked about this before, that the 788 is a very different aircraft than the 789 and 10. This is just one of those many differences. Also, you hate the 788, so there's that.
I do. I don't like it for a variety of reasons.
Mm-hmm. This being one of them, I don't know.
Yes,
maybe that'd be a real weird deep cut for you not to like this aircraft, but it's possible.
That's not the case in this particular regard. As for Jason's comments about the APU last week, he was just wrong.
I was reading a thing that was wrong, or
that
I read
was
it
just
wrong. The APU, in fact, is not on and running during takeoff. That is turned off before the takeoff roll. And in fact, the checklist says make sure it's turned off. So yeah, not on. So if there was a double engine failure and the RAT would be deployed, it is not because the APU is not working, or it may have not been working, who knows. It is in fact not supposed to be operating at that phase of flight.
And finally, regarding the RAM air turbine.
Wait, there's more?
Well, we got a couple comments. I wanted to clarify something. This, I don't think we got wrong, but I did want to clarify it because I did get a couple of comments. And so I wanted to make sure everyone that had listened last week kind of understood what we were talking about. The RAT comes out. It can come out for multiple reasons. So complete loss of engine power is one of them. When there's not enough hydraulic pressure in the hydraulic systems, that's another. When certain electric elements are not operating properly, and you can also deploy it manually. So I didn't want to make it sound like we were saying it was dual engine failure, and that's the only thing that could have caused the RAT to drop. That is one of the possible scenarios in this instance. Certainly having some data from the flight data recorder would be helpful in this regard.
Yeah. What of the two flight data recorders that they have both of,
What perchance happened here? So we'll get there eventually, I hope.
I can't imagine we won't.
Those are the things that we wanted to correct and clarify. So thank you to everyone who wrote in. Thank you specifically to our wonderful Canadian plane person. You know who you are, who helped us out with some great information there. The NTSB held its board meeting yesterday, June 24th, to discuss the probable cause of the mid-cabin exit door plug blowout, Alaska Airlines Flight 1282.
I can't believe we're still talking about this.
Well, these things take some time to work their way through the system. We've known for a long time what happened. The bolts that hold the door in place were not reinstalled after they were removed because areas near that exit door plug needed to be reworked. Rivets needed work. They needed to take the door out. They didn't put the bolts back in. Door eventually popped out.
Mistakes were made.
But now we know a bit more of the how. So the NTSB lists the probable cause of this incident as, quote, Boeing's inadequate training, guidance, and oversight. That's something.
That's a lot of bad.
That's a lot of bad. They also said that the Federal Aviation Administration was ineffective in ensuring Boeing addressed, quote, repetitive and systemic non-conformance issues associated with its parts removal process.
So basically, no one was doing any of the things they were supposed to do. Boeing's training was inadequate. Their guidance was inadequate. Their oversight was inadequate. And the FAA's oversight of Boeing's oversight, training, and guidance was ineffective. So basically, no one was doing their jobs, which is just not good.
It's almost worse than no one doing their jobs because individual people were doing their jobs overall.
Even if they didn't have the correct training to do that job. That's the bad part.
Yeah.
Let's skip right to that.
Yes. Give me the quote, Jason.
I guess I will just quote John Ostrower's Blue Sky post in full here. But, quote, as part of its investigation, NTSB found 23 members of the 24-member door team had not been directly trained on how to open or close a 737 MAX mid-exit door plug at the time the Alaska 1282 aircraft was being built. Number 24, you might think. 23 out of 24, that leaves you with one. Well, the 24th person, they were out of the country, potentially, I guess, on vacation. So at the entirety of the Boeing organization, the door team, there was one person who potentially had the training to remove or replace the door plug, and that person simply was unavailable at the moment. So you had one of 23 other people who is still not identified, probably will never be identified, removing and replacing the door, despite them not actually having any training on how to do that. Things were not good at Boeing at that point.
No. The NTSB has a list of 35 findings that include findings about the mid-exit door plug specifically, the Boeing safety management system, Boeing's processes for installing and removing these doors, the Federal Aviation Administration's oversight of Boeing's work, as well as just generally approving of Boeing's safety management system. But they also talk about some of the other things that they found that aren't specifically related to the door plug itself, but an incident on a flight. Could have been any flight, but this specific flight. And one of those things that they talk about is the crew being insufficiently trained in a realistic scenario to use emergency equipment. And this is the second time we're hearing about this year. There was a previous incident aboard a Swiss A330 in which it was a smoke and fumes event on board. And the flight attendants had to use supplemental oxygen and fume hoods. And they didn't really know how to do that in an actual emergency setting. The equipment they had didn't work for them. The equipment itself worked, but there were problems, and there were problems in this flight as well with removing the masks and safety equipment from its packaging. Where in the Alaska flight, the cabin crew, they had to, quote, improvise a tool to open the packaging. So the NTSB is nice here and says that suggests the standards, the design, or both do not adequately consider ease of use and quick downing in an emergency.
Yeah, the NTSB also praised the crew, and I quote here, point number 7 of the findings was the teamwork and complementary duties of the flight crew, which occurred during the emergency, reinforced the necessity for a minimum crew of 2 pilots, which I thought was really quite interesting to kind of put that jab in there, probably of the FAA, that like, hey, teamwork, was really effective here. And this flight crew did almost everything exactly as they should have. And hey, it turns out having two people up there on the flight deck is really helpful in situations that you really can't predict like this. That there were some oddities. Like they said, the flight crew did not perform the procedures to switch communications back to their headsets after removing their oxygen masks, but it had no adverse effect on the subsequent safe landing of the airplane, blah, blah, blah. But really found it interesting that they snuck that finding in there of like, hey, having two people, definitely better than one in a situation like this.
Yeah, I caught that one as well and thought, oh, interesting, the NTSB, this is where they're at right now.
Mm-hmm.
So now what? Obviously, Boeing is deep into a rework of its entire corporate culture and enhancement of its safety practices. So that remains ongoing. They are also working on certification of a redesign of the actual door plug. So that redesign will add two pieces that prevent it from moving, quote, if they're installed correctly, which makes it sound like, oh, well, there's your opening for problems again. But the design will be such that if they're not installed correctly, you can't install the sidewall of the aircraft. So
or you can install it poorly. There's that.
Well, yeah. And then hopefully that'll be, something that QA catches. They're also going to put lanyards that connect the bolts to the door plug so that you can't remove the bolts. You can take the bolts out of the thing to open the plug, but you can't, just toss the bolts. They'll always be connected to the door plug.
That's good.
And there will be hammer-shaped secondary retention devices that will be installed that need to be rotated into position to complete the installation of the plug. So there's multiple pieces of hardware now that will ensure that the plug is where it's supposed to be.
In response to the NTSB board meeting, the FAA issued a statement, as it often does, not particularly long, but that's okay. It said the FAA takes NTSB recommendations seriously and will carefully evaluate those issued today. The FAA has fundamentally changed how it oversees Boeing since the Alaska Airlines door plug accident, and we will continue this aggressive oversight to ensure Boeing fixes its systemic production quality issues. We are actively monitoring Boeing's performance and meet weekly with the company to review its progress and any challenges it's facing in implementing necessary changes. We have a full complement of safety inspectors in Boeing's facilities, and they are conducting more targeted audits and inspections. While Boeing is making progress, we will not lift the 737 monthly production cap until we are confident the company can maintain safety and quality while making more aircraft. I guess that's all you'd expect the FAA to say. Still have absolutely no idea when they'll lift that cap to allow Boeing to make more 737s, but at this rate, I'm not confident they'd be able to do it anyway with the supply chain. So I guess everything is fine.
Sure. Fine seems
fine.
Fine seems fine. Let's stick with the 737 MAX, but switch over to earlier accidents. Because lawyers for the relatives of 737 MAX crash victims have filed with the U.S. federal judge overseeing the case between Boeing and the Department of Justice to reject the non-prosecution agreement that Boeing and the DOJ recently reached. So Judge Reed O'Connor now has before him requests from the relatives that he not allow the non-prosecution agreement to go forward, reject that agreement, and appoint a special prosecutor to carry on the case because they say the Department of Justice is conflicted and they believe that the DOJ has an interest in not seeing the case through. The lawyers say, quote, this would be necessary to, quote, reflect the fact that Boeing criminally caused the deaths of the crash victims and that the compensation payments that are part of the non-prosecution agreement are, quote, designed to persuade families to support a deal letting Boeing essentially buy its way out of a criminal conviction. They're also concerned that because Boeing and the DOJ have already signed the non-prosecution agreement, that the DOJ could possibly be prohibited by the agreement of pursuing the case, even if the judge rejects the motion to dismiss. So they're saying the special prosecutor is necessary because even if the judge rejected this non-prosecution agreement, the DOJ couldn't move forward anyway. So I'm not really sure what would happen in that case if they didn't
Me neither.
get a special prosecutor. The attorneys are also, this is the attorneys for the victims' families as well. They're asking the judge to declare parts of the non-prosecution agreement void, appoint a special prosecutor, and then see this through to trial. So it'll be very interesting to see where this heads next, because if we go all the way back to the beginning, there was a deferred prosecution agreement that was reached. Then, in part because of the Alaska incident, the DOJ said, okay, now you violated the deferred prosecution agreement. We are going to prosecute you. Then the administration changed from the Biden administration to the Trump administration. Trump's DOJ said, we're going to not move forward with this. We've reached a non-prosecution agreement. Boeing is eager to sign that. And now we are where we are. So it'll be interesting to see what happens next.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure where this goes or when it goes. I'm not sure if there are any deadlines for filing or responses, but I guess it's up to Judge O'Connor at this point.
Story just keeps on going.
It does indeed. Let's stick with the law for a moment because we're going to Russia, Jason.
Oh, can we not?
Well, we're going to London to talk about Russia.
Oh, that's much better. I already booked a flight to London once today.
Excellent. So this goes back to Russian airlines keeping leased aircraft following the invasion of Ukraine, where lessors outside of Russia said, hey, we want our planes back. And Russian airlines said, no, we're just going to keep them. And so we have Irish lessor AerCap and other aircraft leasing entities saying, well, we need our money back. If we can't get the planes back, we need our money. So they filed insurance claims. And they used all risk claims and war risk claims because they're stolen planes and they were stolen because of a war. And the insurers said, well, the planes are still there, so we don't have to pay you.
Oh.
Because they weren't destroyed. They weren't destroyed. They're just not yours anymore. You're not able to.
I have a feeling that the courts may have taken another stance on that situation.
So it finally worked its way through the court. And the insurance companies argued the planes are still there and there's a possibility that you could get them back. And the lessor said, even if we could get them back at this point, they're no good to us.
They're unusable. Whatever is in Russia now is no longer usable, even if it is technically usable. It is, what would you call that? Usable but not usable? Just they're Schrodinger's airplanes. They both exist and they don't exist.
There you go. So the judge in the London Superior Court has said, yes, insurance companies, you owe these lessors money. And so there's about $1.1 billion at stake here. The big question now is, when are these lessors going to get paid? And that's still the uncertain part. So I'm sure there's a lot of negotiation still to come about how much they're actually going to get paid and when they're going to get paid. But the judge has said, no, you owe them the money.
All right. That's good. That seems sane and reasonable. And it took a long time to get there.
Next? Sane and reasonable. What will happen next?
I don't know.
Speaking of sane and reasonable.
Oh, wow, what a transition.
Not, as the case may be. Canada's competition regulator has said, no, we should let foreign companies own 100% of airlines in Canada.
This is the Canada that lives north of like the US, that same Canada, the same Canada that's been so protectionist that like
Canada.
That like foreign carriers can only operate a couple times a week, and that like didn't Qatar Airways only like recently get into Toronto? Like Canada's been super protectionist.
So up to 2018, foreign entities could only own up to 25% of a Canadian airline. In 2018, that changed to up to 49%. So no foreign entity can own a majority of a Canadian airline. Canada's Competition Bureau is now saying, hey, why not let them own 100%?
Is that a good idea?
So it seems on the face of things to be an interesting idea to increase competition, because what that would allow is other companies, other airlines to come in and offer flights and lower fares. That said, historically, allowing
Yeah.
this has not worked for both the country that is allowing it and especially the foreign airlines that are doing it.
This doesn't pass the sniff test, and I'm real interested to know why now? Why is this happening now?
I think this had just been working its way through as a study, but it'll be interesting to see what happens given, I mean, there have been certainly changes. I mean, we've gone from 25% to 49% within the last 10 years. So I'm not sure where this goes. Historically speaking, you had Air Canada and another airline, and that was it.
Yep. Still kind of the case, depending on your region.
Right. But now you have Porter finding its legs a bit. They just announced a bunch of new
non-US routes.
Exactly. Headed to a bunch of warm places. And you've got Flair that's still there.
Don't forget WestJet. But that, I guess, is the other, yeah.
WestJet was the other airline. Sorry if I wasn't clear on that one. But what ends up happening when countries allow this foreign ownership is you get a bunch of airlines or a few airlines coming in right away, offering a couple flights, not really knowing how to make it work with their own networks, and then leaving. So I get the idea behind this, but it just never really works in practice.
We'll keep an eye on it. Not closely, but
if anything comes of it, we'll see. If they change the law, then we can start looking at it. Let's talk about other things that never really work in practice. And that's WOW 2.0 is ever so closer to not existing anymore. So the CEO and vice chairman of Play, which is, I guess, technically still based in Iceland, is trying to leave Iceland entirely.
They're moving to the Maltese neighborhood of
Exactly. Iceland. They're trying to close up stakes and shift everything over to their Malta operation, their Malta AOC. They would get rid of the Icelandic AOC and become Play Europe.
Okay.
Gone is the transatlantic flying.
I'm still surprised they're still around. So
yeah,
okay. If this is what they got to do,
yeah, exactly. They want to be done with this by the end of summer. Pretty aggressive timeline, but something that I think is best for everyone if it keeps them flying.
Okay, I have nothing to add.
All right,
go for it. Sure.
Let's end the show with there are some airlines that can't be killed. Alitalia, as we've talked about recently, is one of them, but not too far away is Air Europa. By all accounts, Air Europa should not exist anymore.
No, but COVID happened and now it still does. And then some other stuff along the way, but I think that was the main thing keeping Air Europa.
Every time somebody tries to buy them, because somebody will eventually buy them, it doesn't work out. IAG tried to buy them. I think Air France KLM looked at it. Lufthansa Group had some ideas. Everyone has just said, okay, let's just figure out where to put them.
Maybe we'll see an Uno reverse card plate here, and Air Canada will buy Turkish. No, wait, I meant Air Europa. Oh, I gave it away. I read the wrong thing. I gave it all away. Okay, well, it's Turkish.
Turkish Airlines has said that it is in discussions with Air Europa for an investment opportunity. It doesn't look like they're going to purchase Air Europa, at least at this point, but they're looking to invest in the airline. What's interesting here is that Turkish is one of the largest carriers in Star Alliance. Air Europa is currently, for the moment, still in SkyTeam, and that would leave them at cross purposes depending on what type of investment this would be. But we'll see what happens and see if they actually do anything there, or if this is just another airline tossing its hat in the ring.
I didn't see that coming. Turkish isn't exactly known for gobbling up other European airlines at all. That's Lufthansa's thing.
Yeah, exactly. This is one to watch to see.
I don't know how I feel about this.
I'm not entirely sure what's going on here, but interesting nonetheless. I said we were going to close the show, but talking about SkyTeam reminded me that we can wish SkyTeam a happy 25th anniversary.
Hey!
SkyTeam is 25 years old. They celebrated their 25th anniversary over the weekend. So congratulations, SkyTeam, and all your SkyTeam Alliance airlines.
Yes, they've still got all their founding airlines, right?
I think so.
Maybe.
I think so.
Yeah, Delta, Aeromexico, Air France, and Korean. I think they're all still there. That's nice.
And they've added a couple fairly recently.
Yes.
But maybe they'll lose Air Europa at some point in the future. We just don't know.
Aeroflot, but they've added SAS, which is nice.
There you go. Well, on that note, we're going to call this good enough for episode 326 of AvTalk.
Just barely.
Just barely. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Thanks for listening.